happy to have a full Italian paper today that will be presented by Massimo Anelli, joint work with Andrea Ichino and Tommaso Colussi. I'm really looking forward to this paper. I mean, the title is intriguing. Somehow I was wondering whether it's connected to another of Andrea paper that I know called the Civicness Drain, which is about internal migration in Italy, driven by some cultural factors, but we will see. In any case, I really look forward to this presentation, and Massimo, you will be the presenter. So you have, as you know, 45 minutes, and then we will have 15 minutes left for questions and discussion. And also your co-authors have the opportunity to take the questions that are asked in the chat and do some screening between those they can answer in writing during the presentation, and those they want to address and forward to you maybe for the 15 minutes discussion. That will be also Simone's a role as a managing authority for this seminar. So without further ado, Massimo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hillel, for the invitation and for the presentation. This is work indeed about geographic sorting of Italian migrants based on aversion to breaking rules. But before telling you what we do in this paper, let me just define really quickly what we mean for aversion to breaking rules. Aversion to breaking rules is an individual psychological cost that an individual face when breaking rules. Okay, so possibly an individual with high aversion to breaking rules will not break a rule, even though there is no whatsoever deterrence, there is no whatsoever punishment for breaking the rule. What we do in this paper is trying to understand whether the heterogeneity that we observe across different localities in the level of aversion to breaking rules is explained or is driven by migration sorting based on aversion to breaking rules. Okay, so I will talk about, summarize aversion to breaking rules in the acronym ABR just to make things easier for the rest of the paper. Sometimes I will also interchangeably use the concept of honest to make things easier. So what we do in the paper is the following. We first document a new measure of cheating that can be observed for the entire census population. Second, we're going to determine under which conditions these measures of rule breaking, and in general measures of rule breaking, are actually informative about something more intrinsic, which is ABR. Then this theoretical framework that we elaborate shows that there are two testable hypotheses to determine whether a measure of cheating can actually be informative about ABR. And what we do is, in the empirical part of the paper, we exploit a set of fascist reforms to test empirically these two theoretical predictions. Okay, so we are going to be able to confirm that our measure is indeed informative about ABR. Once we validate this measure, we show that Italians have been sorting themselves across from south to north, especially on the basis of this intrinsic measure of ABR. And finally, in the very last part of the paper, we will show that the geographic sorting that happened throughout the past century has actually had important consequences for economic outcomes in different localities. Okay, so what we are not going to do in this paper, what we don't do in this paper, and what we're not going to discuss in this paper is why people should sort based on ABR. This is indeed what the paper of Andrea that Hillel was talking about already explained. So for today, just by the idea that individuals who are tired of being free-rided in a given locality will choose to emigrate in a place where people do respect rules more, so that it is not free-rided anymore. So it's in a public good game setting, there is this incentive to migrate and sort where people will respect rules more if you have a high ABR. So let me right away tell you how we measure cheating. Let me right away show you the measure of our new measure of cheating. So we started this work because we had anecdotal evidence about the fact that Italians, especially at the beginning of the past century, tended to register the birth of their kids in a false date. Okay, so in particular, we knew that there was preference of individual families to register the birth on the 1st of January instead of the real birth at the end of December. So for instance, I have a colleague at Bocconi who always says that he's lucky to exist just because his great-grandfather has cheated on the birth date of his grandfather. And so as a consequence, his grandfather was not drafted for the Second World War and was still alive. Okay, so we knew about this anecdotal evidence. We got access to restricted census data, Italian data, to document whether this anecdotal evidence was actually a thing, a statistical thing. And so what we discovered is that this phenomenon was very widespread for cohorts born between 1920 and 1954. So these data, these graphs that you're seeing are from the census of 1991, okay? And each bar represents the frequency of the number of birds for beans of 5 days, okay? And so especially in the south, what you can see is that in the last 15 days of December, there is a missing mass of birds, while on the first 5 days of January, there is a really high mass, really large mass of birds registered on that day. The phenomenon is existing also in the north, but is less strong, okay? But let me clarify right away, in this paper, we are not going to say much about whether the north and the south are more or less averse to breaking rules. We're actually going to claim that it's hard to compare cheating across areas. And so what we're going to do is we're going to focalize on specific locality. We're going to look at differences in cheating within specific localities. What is interesting is that the data show that whenever there was a benefit for cheating, Italian families would cheat on the birth date. So for the non-Italians in the virtual room, there is in Italy, especially in the south of Italy, a famous book of dreams that associates any given situations that you can dream about to a specific number. And then you're supposed to play those numbers at the lottery or things like that. So this is as a really strong cultural value in the south of Italy. So the number 17 is associated with something really bad happening, like a misfortune and disgrace. And so the number 17 is a very unlucky number, like the 13 elsewhere. And so what you can see is that in the south, where families felt that there was a benefit for having the kid not born on the 17th, actually prefer to cheat on the birth date and declare that their kid was not born on the 17th, but on the day before, on the day after. So another conceptual point is that we observe this missing mass and this excess mass of birth date. This doesn't allow to tell us, like, individual by individual, who is actually cheating, or family by family, which family are actually cheating. What we can do is, like, we can focus on groups of individuals and calculate what is the share for a group of individuals of families that cheat, families who cheat and families who do not cheat. So in practice, what we measure is this pi GLT, which essentially is assuming that birds should be distributed according to a uniform distribution around New Year's Eve. And so all the excess mass that we find in January relative to uniform distribution must be cheating. And so in a practical way, this measure can be interpreted as a share of family cheating. And so this is going to have value 0 if no family cheats, and it's going to have our measure is going to have a value of 1/2 if half of the families with real births before December 31st actually registered the birth at the beginning of January. So let me tell you which are the possible reasons for this cheating on the birth date. We have already said for the 17th birthday, but for the January birthday cheating, there are multiple reasons. So first, there is an advantage of having a child participating in court settings, in several court settings, a year later. Okay, so by delaying the birth registration by 1 day or a few days, your child becomes from being the youngest in a court to being the oldest in a court. Okay, so in terms of cognitive development at school, in terms of physical sports, or in terms of military service and things like that, there's going to be an advantage of doing this. And this is actually today, this happens in a more formal way, for instance, in the US, where many families decide to, it's called red shirt their kids so that they can participate in sports or go to school with the following cohort if they're born in December. More generally, we're talking about a period, so between the 1920s and 1950s, in which Italy was still prevalently rural, and so having a child available at home for an extra year before is drafted for the military service or before the daughter needs to find a husband is going to be a big advantage. And so that's the other reason for cheating, the other anecdotal reason for doing this type of cheating. The census information that we have does not allow us to actually pin down the reason, the specific reason for why certain individuals would do this cheating or not. But what we can do is that we can rule out many irrelevant reasons that you can come up with for this specific cheating. Okay, so in principle, indeed, this cheating that we observe might have nothing to do with aversion to breaking rules. Okay, however, so for instance, you can think that it's just due to misreporting birth dates. So, you know, like people just don't remember their own birth date, and so they just give 1st of January as a possible birth date. This is clearly not consistent with what observed in the data. Indeed, first of all, we find the same pattern using several censuses, so 2001 census and 2011. But most importantly, as you will see later, there is a strong over time across cohort variation in this cheating, which is going to be crucial for the rest of the paper. And so it's very unreasonable to think that 70 years later or 60 years later, just one cohort of difference might cause such a difference in misreporting. Another possibly relevant reason is the fact that offices might be closed around Christmas. Okay, so what we did is we checked whether there is a similar pattern around Easter, but we do not observe any missing mass around Easter. So it's very unlikely that this is driven by offices being closed. And finally, there is no specific correlation with education. So for instance, there is still quite an amount of cheating also for high education families. Planned C-sections also cannot be a major determinant in this case. First of all, because in that period that we analyze during that period there were not many C-sections going on from a medical point of view, and then most of the births were still happening at home. And then second, there is evidence that C-section can be used to anticipate a birth strategically for tax purposes, for instance, but not really to delay a birth like what we observe in the data.
Massimo, sorry, a quick
Yes.
question related to your last remark. What is the share of birth at the hospital in the north and in the south? Because I presume that there's quite a bit of heterogeneity and you can only cheat if you deliver at home.
Yeah, so we didn't manage to get a specific data for that period about C-sections. We have been working a lot, but we couldn't get many data. But exactly, I mean, you make a point that is going to be crucial for our paper. We actually claim that we cannot say much by looking at this cheating measure or other cheating measures about the difference between the South and the North, because indeed institutional differences might be the main determinant of these differences cheating. And so then the measure cannot be informative about those differences. So, okay, we cannot really pin down the specific reason for which everybody, each person in the census decides to cheat on this birth date. But our measure has really important advantages. So first of all, it's a cheating measure that can be calculated for the entire census population, okay, for the entire population using the census. The second advantage is that it can be computed for small groups in the population and at different points in time, which is going to be really crucial for our paper. Then we show that this measure correlates very closely across cities with more traditional indicators of cheating. So for instance, cheating in standardized tests, or absenteeism, or the share of buildings that are not registered with the tax agency in the locality. Okay, so our measure is highly correlated with these more traditional measures of cheating and rule breaking. A caveat that we need to make at this point, and that one aspect that you might have already thought about, the cheating action is taken by the parents of the kids, but we observe only the migration decision of the kids. Okay, so we observe the migration action of the kid. It's unclear whether the kid migrate with the family or by him or herself after, when in the adult age. So in the paper, we talk about families, about high ABR families or low ABR families, but for easiness, we are going to talk during the presentation just about migrants and remainers. So those who decide to emigrate and those who decide to remain in a given locality. Okay, but there is plenty of paper that show that these type of norms are transmitted intergenerationally with a really high degree of persistence. So this shouldn't be a major issue for our analysis.
So maybe a clarification question, Massimo. So you observe only the propensities to migrate out of places with high degrees of cheating, not, or do you observe whether the migrants are the ones with birth dates that have been cheated on? No,
yes.
It's the, yeah?
No, so
you have the birth dates, the individual birth dates.
Yeah, so we measure birth dates, of course, at the origin locality. So we are going to be able to calculate the share of cheating families, yes, among those families who later emigrate, and among those families who later remain for the rest of their life in the same location. So that we'll be able to say whether the families who later decide to migrate have actually cheated.
Okay, so it's within locality.
Within locality, yes, within locality, and that's the main advantage of our measure. So what we're going to do next is I give you a basic theoretical framework to understand whether our measure is informative about cheating, and then we're going to show you the empirical result. So I don't have time to go through the entire model, but let me give you just, given the time constraint, but let me give you just the main intuition about the model. So individuals face benefit, a distribution of benefits from the cheating action, and they face a expected public penalty. So they face an external public penalty for cheating, which is the deterrence D. But they also have this individual private aversion to breaking rule A. Okay, so our theoretical framework is based on a lexicographic type of decision process in which an individual with very high private aversion to breaking rules with very high A will tend not to cheat okay, independently of D, okay? So even if there is very little punishment or very little monitoring, a high A type is going to decide not to cheat because his or her private aversion to breaking rules is very high. If instead the aversion to breaking rule A is rather low, then the individual will decide to cheat or not based on the deterrence D. Okay, so at that point, if deterrence is very high, then the individual will still decide not to cheat, but if deterrence is sufficiently low, then the individual will decide to still cheat, okay? This is a very important point because this implies that if you observe somebody not cheating, you can't really say a priori whether that individual is not cheating, is respecting the rule because they have a high ABR or because there is a high deterrence. So the rest of the model is based on the fact that we divide the population in two types of individuals, a high ABR type and a low ABR type, so that we can define omega H as the frequency of the high ABR types in a given population, in a given group. Okay. Before telling you which are the main hypotheses, theoretical hypotheses of the model that we can test empirically, let me just give you the empirical context in which we are going to apply our model. So we define a migrant as someone born in the South and observed in the North at the time of the census. So we can measure pi MLT as the share of cheaters among the migrants, among the emigrants from locality L born at time T, and pi RLT as a share of cheaters among the remainers in the locality L born at time T. Okay, so the main identifying assumption, if you want, that we are going also to try to verify empirically is that in each locality and given time period, both migrants and remainers are exposed to the same deterrence and face and have a similar distribution of cheating benefits. Okay, absent this assumption, it's really hard to say something about the intrinsic norm of individuals based on observing their cheating action. So if you can assume in the empirical frame, in empirical context, if you can assume that individuals are facing the same deterrence and have similar benefits, then our model gives two main testable predictions. The first one is rather trivial, and it says that if you observe that the cheating of the migrants is lower than the cheating of the remainers, those who are born in a locality and remain in the locality, then it must be that omega H, so the frequency of honest individual, is higher among the migrants. Okay. The second theoretical implication that can be tested empirically is less trivial and way more interesting. It tells you that if you observe a sudden change in deterrence, then if the group of migrants reacts less to the change in deterrence, so they react less, they change their cheating level less because of the change of deterrence than the group of remainers, then this means that the frequency of honest individuals among the migrants is higher than the frequency of honest individual among the remainers. Okay, and the intuition is that if in a group there is a high frequency of individuals with a high aversion to breaking rules, then the group is going to be less sensitive to change in deterrence, okay, because of the decision process that I've discussed earlier.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question? So I guess most of what you're saying depends on assuming that the deterrence is uncorrelated to characteristics that may also affect migration decisions, right?
Yes, that's correct. And yeah, that's
the identifying assumption for the exercise that you're going to do.
Yes, that's true. And we can empirically First, we're going to empirically control for the characteristics of migrants and remainers within locality. And then we're going to use the Oster's method for measuring how much the unobservables can account to tell you that what we can control for is already good enough if you want for that assumption to hold.
I see.
Massimo, could I follow up on this? So in the language of the model, what is the difference between the north and the south? Is it just the frequency of the different types, or do the benefits and the level of deterrence also differ?
Yeah, so our model doesn't say much about the differences in the south and in the north, between the south and the north, because deterrence cannot be held constant, if you want, between north and the south. So our model tells you that if you observe that in the north there is less cheating, it might well be because deterrence is much higher in the north than in the south.
Okay, so there are no, I'm just like wondering whether there are any hidden, implicit assumptions that you need to make here.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We don't have enough time to go through the model, but we link the paper, so like we are happy to. We can discuss better later.
Just a very quick question. Can you explain just intuitively why in the model individual migrates? What are the?
Yeah. So no, in this paper we don't really we don't really discuss why individual migrates, because there are other papers that we rely on. I mean, Andrea Ichino has another paper. And so the idea is that in a public good game, if you are in a given locality, then and you are a honest individual, then you are tired of being free-rided by other individuals, and so you will decide to migrate towards a location in which your contribution is not free-rided and the level of public good is more consistent with what you are actually contributing. In very short, we can have a much larger discussion, but we can keep it for later. It's not the focus of this paper.
Yeah, but there is no, is it fair to say that there is no social determination of the migration decision here? Is it depend? Do you have a kind of coordination game? Do you have a kind of, people decide to move if they're it's not clear whether being in a high cheating environment or low cheating environment pushes you, gives you additional incentive to move or to stay depending on your type. Do you have this kind of thing that Andrea is in his other paper?
Yes, we are not neither modeling nor really empirically testing these. And so here there are just like two exogenous types. And so we are just interested in understanding, first, where there is immigration, is the type of, are migrants, those who decide to migrate, more or less honest, essentially. And then in the last part of the paper, we look more at how this selective sorting.
You would expect that in a high cheating environment, if you're a low cheating person, as you said, you have more incentives to move, and conversely. If you believe in homophily as a criteria for the migration decision, which I think most models do. Yes, we are not actually modeling or testing this in this paper. But what you're going to see in the second part of the paper is that we're going to measure how much has the cheating equilibrium or the honesty equilibrium worsened because of selective migration. But I agree that this is important. That what you're saying is important, but I guess this is the main difference between the paper by Andrea that you were mentioning and this one. Okay, I guess the question is about heterogeneous effects across localities.
Sorry, what effects?
Heterogeneous effects along this dimension precisely across localities. You said that the equilibrium worsens due to migration, but it depends whether you start from a high or low cheating. It should, theoretically. Anyway,
yes,
I don't want to...
but you're going to see we're going to control for the initial level of cheating, and we're going to see how much is worsened based on the initial level. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
All right. So I feel guilty to say that you have 10 minutes left because I took one or two with my questions, but you have 10 minutes left.
Yeah, this is very, we have still a lot to cover. So an observation in the empirical analysis is either a group of migrants or remainers in a given locality, but of course born in the 10 days around New Year's Eve. And then we aggregate bienniums together to have enough observations for small localities. So at the end of the day, what I want to stress is that only from south to north, there is enough emigration for us to measure cheating reliably for the group of migrants and the remainers. In the north, there are only a bunch of localities, the black localities, who actually have enough migration for us to measure. So the rest of the paper that you're going to see is going to be focusing on the selection from south to north of Italy. And so this is the first descriptive evidence. This is just like aggregate evidence, and it's showing you, focusing on the south here, that the cheating among remainers is higher than the cheating for migrants. And for the few people who migrate from north to south, this cheating is, the sorting goes in the opposite direction. So migrants from north to south tend to cheat much more than those who are born in the north and stay in the north. Okay, this is descriptive evidence. In a regression setting, as we were mentioning earlier, let's just focus, given the time, on the column 4. We can estimate the difference between migrants and remainers in the south and migrants and remainers in the north with these two parameters. And at the same time, we can control for year and locality fixed effects. We can control for the gender, education, and cohort composition of the group of migrants and remainers within each locality. And then we can even interact all these characteristics of the group of migrants and remainers. Okay, so that we are able to saturate the model quite a lot. And as I was mentioning earlier, we used the test designed by Oster and showed that the unobservables would have to account for up to 8 times more than the observables for the sorting based on ABR from south to north to be actually 0. Okay, while as you can see, no matter how many controls we include, the amount of sorting is pretty stable. So the sorting based on our measure of ABR is rather stable. So let me quickly tell you about the second theoretical hypothesis that we can test empirically. So what happens is that in 1926, the fascist regime suddenly implements a wide set of reforms. So first of all, they want to control more the population, the local population. And so they replace mayors with a figure that is sent from the central government, podestà, who has the goal of controlling the daily life of citizens. But most importantly for us is that the fascist government is very focused on an autarky, economic autarky plan, and on increasing the population for feeding a potential army. And so they're very concerned about population growth. And the fastest way to increase population growth is to reduce infant mortality, which at the time was much higher than the rest of Europe, because almost all births were at the time happening at home. And so what they do is that they create this Opera Nazionale Maternità Infanzia, an institution that was aimed at reducing the high infant mortality by sending obstetricians around the country to help during birth at home. So all of a sudden there is a monitoring, an external individual present at the time of birth that can monitor when the birth actually happened. And so what we observe empirically is that indeed, with the introduction of these reforms, the amount of cheating on the birth date drops pretty dramatically in a very short period of time. And once the fascist regime starts collapsing, and with the start of the Second World War, the amount of cheating goes back to, by 1943, is back to the pre-fascism level of cheating. Okay, so this is a clear response to a change in deterrence to this cheating action. So this change in deterrence allows us to test our second theoretical hypothesis, right? So the fact that if the migrants react less to a change in deterrence, it must be than the remainers, it must be that the frequency of honest individuals is higher among the migrants than among the remainers. Okay, so what we do here in this graph is we show the cheating for remainers, the dark squares, and migrants, the red dots, before the reforms. And you can see that the drop, so the reaction of the migrants to the change in deterrence is smaller than the reaction of the remainers. And at the same time, when the fascism collapses, then the reaction back to high level of cheating is higher for the remainers than for the migrants. Okay, so this is exactly what our second hypothesis of the model predicted. Again, we find the same result by focusing on the most saturated model with the locality fixed effect and by controlling for the characteristics of the groups of migrants and remainers. And still the effect, this again, this regression still shows that even after controlling for all of these, the group of migrants does react less than the group of remainers. And again, we have the Oster delta that shows us that unobservable should account up to 13 times more than the observables for this result to become zero. I have 3 minutes to discuss the last part of the paper. Okay.
You can take 5. Let's take 5.
Okay. Okay. 5 minutes. 5 minutes should be.
You started 2 minutes later, so yeah.
5 minutes should be more than enough. But so in the last part of the paper, what we do is like after we've validated our measure of cheating, what we can do is calculate a measure of ABR drain of aversion to breaking rules. And we do it in the following way. So we look at the cheating of all those who are born in a given locality, and we compare it to the cheating of those who have remained at the end of the period in the 1960s, essentially. And so this difference is telling you how much the cheating has worsened because of migration selection, okay, based on ABR. And so what this map is showing you, especially for the South, this map is showing you first that not all localities have a drain. Not all localities actually worsen their cheating equilibrium due to migration. There is a lot of variation, and there is a lot of variation even within specific regions. So what we do is we assess the economic consequences of this ABR drain with the following equation. We have a current economic outcome on the left-hand side, the ABR drain, and then we keep constant the initial level of cheating as measured in between 1920 and 1926, and we look at how much the outcome has worsened in areas that started with the same level of cheating but ended up with a worse level of cheating because of the selection into immigration. Okay, and so then we can control for a set of local controls at the beginning of the period and for regional fixed effect. The outcomes we focus on are two. The first is vote counting productivity. This is an interesting measure of productivity for two reasons. Like, first of all, because given how ballots are counted in Italy, this is a labor-intensive task that is uniform over the entire country. Everything is counted in the same ways across the entire country. And second, this really captured the impact of reciprocal trust on productivity, because it's possible that you have committees that count ballots in each locality. And so you can either have every member of the committee count each ballot, or divide the committee in different groups that count ballots in parallel, right? If there is no reciprocal trust, then every member of the committee will want to count each ballot or check each ballot, while if there is more trust, then there is scope for more efficiency in terms of ballot counting. Okay, we have seen it also in the US, what happened when there is no reciprocal trust on counting ballot, and how long time it took to count votes in Georgia. So we think this is the right measure for us to kind of connect our measure of drain to productivity through reciprocal trust. And then we also look at a more traditional measure of firm value added per worker using Bureau Van Dyke firm data. This is a table of the main results for the ABR drain. Here, again, if you focus on the most saturated model, there are initial period controls. So the cheating level or the amount of other unique controls at the beginning of the period. We also have region fixed effects, and we have a lot of initial employment and geographic controls. And so we still find a negative large effect for the drain caused by migration selection based on ABR. And in terms of magnitude, what we find is that one standard deviation of ABR drain would reduce the south-north gap by around 4.53 votes, which corresponds to a reduction of 6% in terms of this productivity measure. When looking at value added per worker, that can be more strictly linked to, if you want, GDP or more standard measure of productivity, then we have that one standard deviation ABR drain is linked to a reduction of value added per worker of around 1.4%, which corresponds to, if you want to put it in the magnitude in context, to a reduction of 4.1% of the north-south productivity gap. Okay, so these are the two main results. I stop here given the time. Again, let me just highlight the fact that we used the Oster methods to estimate in this context how much unobservable might account to explain the effect that we find. And so what Oster delta tells you is that the unobservable should account for 44 more times in this case than the observables for the results that we find, the effect that we find to be zero. So even though there is no clear like causal identification in this last part of the analysis, we can reasonably exclude the fact that unobservables play a major role in what we find.
Okay, thank you very much, Massimo. Very, very nice and interesting, and we're excited with the coming discussion. Simone, do you want to allocate speaking time or convey questions from the chat?
I think that most have already been dealt with. So while the others think about their own question, I would just, Joan, go on.
No, go ahead if you had one.
No,
I have one. No, so I mean, it touches on sort of the earlier point and this identification assumption and the role of unobservables, right? I guess the one unobservable that could drive these results is unobserved ability, right? So I was wondering whether you do something directly at that, right? So what are the measures of ability that you can use? How much the point estimates in the first regressions change when including the measures of ability that you have, etc. I think that's really, I mean, I think, you know, it's very interesting, everything that you present. That's the one thing I would sort of
absolutely
worry a little bit.
Yeah, so already in the initial part, if you want, ABR identification part, what we do is we can control for the share of primary, secondary, and tertiary education individuals among the migrant group and among the remainder group. So if in this table, for instance, which tells you about the reaction to the fascism reform, so to deterrence.
Okay, so when you include those is when you move from 0.026 to point, so there's a decline in the point estimate, right?
No, it's between 2 and 3. So when we include the education controls, is yes, between 2 and 3. So so these do not look like they are affecting very much these, and this is due to the fact we're talking about within localities, right? So these are rather small localities, and so within localities, at the time there was not much variation. Okay, most of the variation in terms of skills and education was like between like rural and urban areas, and so what we're looking is like within locality. And so
no, I mean, I understand. I mean, I guess what I have in mind is whether you're smart or not, right? Like perhaps you had huge incentives. If you were smart in this and born in the South, you had huge incentives to move to the North, right? And at the same time, this determines your incentives for cheating at the individual level.
For sure.
But then I guess the assumption is that how smart you are is transferred between parents and kids or something like this, right? So this is a little bit what I'm struggling with fully square.
Yeah. So I mean, as long as education is not capturing like smartness in that sense, which is possible, of course, as we know, then this control might not be enough. So that's why we invested on Oster approach that tells you how much should an observables be correlated with whether you're migrant or not migrant to explain all the effects that we find. And so what this delta is telling you is that, for instance, in terms of the reaction to fascism, the unobservable should be correlated to whether you're migrant or not, 13 times more than education, gender, and age, for instance, and their interactions, in order for our difference in reaction to deterrence to be driven by these unobservables. So from this point of view, we are pretty confident that we are capturing the most relevant. You can see also from the R square, from how much the R square increases and how little the that's of course the intuition behind Oster is that the beta 4 stays pretty constant while R square is increasing a lot. And so yeah, this is pretty, we think we are responding to this very important point in this way. And then when looking at the last part, so looking at the effect on productivity, what is important, I didn't have time to discuss it, but of course it is important to also control for brain drain, for instance, in this first measure. And so what we observe is that like whether we include it or not, like there is still an effect that is driven by our measure of ABR.
May I add one thing? It's also interesting that the brain drain and the ABR drain has zero correlation. And actually, in this paper, and even in my other paper, I don't find any correlation between civicness and skills. So civicness seems roughly uncorrelated with ability.
Thanks. Super interesting discussion and useful. Thank you.
Eli, you have a question?
Yeah, I was puzzled by the map you show, Massimo, that some places in the south are apparently have an ABR gain and not an ABR drain. And so I was really curious about what is driving this variation. So I was wondering whether it is like a coordination problem, or maybe it is due to the initial share of people that break the rules. So if there are enough people initially that respect the rules, then the cheater are chased away in some sense. So it's a reverse that happens. So have you investigated why some places are ABR gain and why other are ABR?
Oh yeah, we were also very interested in these. We haven't looked into the determinants, but let me just clarify two things. So our measure of drain, I didn't have time to go through the math, but essentially is a function also of immigration, of the immigration rate. So because of course, like this is how much has worsened equilibrium. How much has worsened equilibrium is a function of two things. So how many people migrate, so the difference between who migrates and who doesn't migrate in terms of cheating, and how many people migrate. So yeah, it's possible that these positive areas, so the areas with the gain is areas with maybe not much selection and not much migration. So maybe it's not very informative, but I agree with you. Like it would be interesting to understand what could be the determinants, or or what is correlated to having a gain, or what is correlated to having a drain. And then we could start by looking at, for instance, a correlation with the initial level. What we do at the end of the paper, we hold the initial level constant, right? So it's not exactly
that's why I asked for also when I asked you about heterogeneous effect and maybe interacting with your initial level to see whether you do have something interesting to
interacting with the initial level. Yeah.
Add one thing.
Yeah, go on, Andrea, first.
This is actually effectively the theoretical question that is asking in the other paper, because the South did not export only very civic people. We know that Al Capone went to the US and he's certainly not very civic. So the question is that the decision of civic and uncivic, or honest or non-honest, to migrate is fairly complicated if you think about it, because if you are civic, you certainly want to leave if you are surrounded by dishonest people. But also the dishonest people want to leave if they are left only with dishonest people, because then they have nobody else to free ride. So there is a coordination pattern. There are interdependencies between the decision of the honest and less honest in order to migrate. And there are also concerns about risk aversion, because you also have to understand how you will be considered in the north where you migrate. So will you be considered honest, or will you be considered non-honest if you come from a place that is considered not honest, okay? So what I would like to say about this paper is that we want to stay away from this question and have a much more humble empirical question. That is, whatever the determinants of sorting, did sorting imply a drain or a gain, and where it implied a drain or a gain? So we want just to measure it and then infer the consequences. We are not here to explain why we have a drain in one place or a gain, but just to observe the consequences of this.
Thanks, Andrea. Giuseppe?
Yes, Andrea and all the others. I know that there are data available, especially at INPS, at the National Agency for, say, the pensions and everything. I was wondering whether you can explore any different, this is not exactly related with your paper, because as you said, Andrea, you want to see the effect at the, say, geographical level in the different regions, in the different parts of this idea. But something that I imagine you could explore is whether people who are, whether the wages of those people that are affected by JBD, so they are born in those particular dates, are very different with respect to other people, or whether there is a difference between migrants and non-migrants in terms of wages. This is another way of looking at the economic effects of migration in some ways for this kind of people. Probably this is maybe the object of another paper, because as you said, you want to see the effect at the local level. But I think it may be useful to explore, given the fact that we have this data available, whether there is a difference between these two types of people.
Andrea, you want?
Oh, yes, this is actually a very good suggestion. I mean, on average, those born in those days, we cannot say it for a single individual, but on average, there is something that could be said once I know that a group has a certain type of date of birth or not. So thanks for the suggestion. We may apply for this data and look for it.
Toman?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, what is the potential role of migrant networks here? So say the initial heterogeneity in ABR that you observed in the South and in the North could already reflect past migration, and therefore make migration that follows easier. And I'm just like wondering whether you can really disentangle these two aspects, whether it's it's just access to a network that you get, or is it really the specific trait that drives this migration? Maybe it's just both, and that's fine. But it would be nice if you can clarify this aspect a bit.
Yeah, I think with the measure, the way we construct it at the moment, yeah, we are not able to disentangle this. Like as I was showing before, like if you think of the math of this, like it's gonna be, the drain is gonna be a function, but if you want, the network, the pre-existing network might actually be the exogenous variation that we have here. So that might be one of the exogenous variations for which areas that started with a given level, with the same level of cheating, ended up with more or less cheating overall because of stronger or weaker networks, and so because of more or less migration, holding the amount of selection constant, for instance.
Okay, I think we need to stop. Unless there is one last urgent question.
I think there's a question from Luigi. Yeah, Luigi.
I have a question going back to this to the measurement of cheating that you have. That is basically refers to the parents. And then we had made this hypothesis of whether you migrate because you're very different from the people around you, your location, etc., etc. This kind of reasoning might also apply within each family. So if my father is a cheater and I'm very different from him, I might have an incentive to migrate. Now, I'm not sure what you can do or whether you have something to say about that and how could that interplay with the interpretation in general.
Well, it's a very interesting question. And so theoretically, it's possible, although this literature that is cited in these slides tend to say that on average, values are transmitted from parents to children, and there is a lot of correlation between parents and children in these values. If all this literature on parenting style is valid, it is a little bit different than what you're saying. But I agree that potentially this is something that would be nice to test. So I don't know if you know the movie, the Cento Passi, about this guy who is the son of a mafia person,
yes,
coming from a family and tries to escape. So you're totally right. This would be an interesting question. Unfortunately, the Italian census does not allow us to reconstruct family structure, and so there's lots of constraints on doing this. But with different type of data, it would be very, very interesting question to explore.
Thanks a lot.
So thank you, everybody. Thank you especially to Massimo and Andrea for taking some of the questions, and to all the participants for the feedback and interaction. So goodbye, and see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.